Hello. So, here we have the San Gabriel Mission. Anyone ever been out there? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if you have, I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of things you've already seen. If you haven't, maybe you don't have to go anymore. No, you really should go. So this is what probably the most iconic image of the building from the outside. And I love that little tree growing out of the downspout. I don't know. There's me and my wife. There's the Mission Museum. And while I was touring around, one of the things about the place is you quickly realize is that viticulture, would that be the correct term? Viticulture definitely originated in Southern California at that spot. And they make a big deal out of it. Across the street, there's something called Grapevine Park. It says, beyond these walls stands the old grapevine, planted in 1861. This famed vine, capital V, stands today as a heritage and a monument to the early pioneers of San Gabriel. They have a marker, 1861. We like markers here at the Culver City Historical Society. This one was put there by the Native Daughters of the Golden West in 1971. Look at that thing. That was a vine. So they have every right to espouse the grandeur of it. If you even look up into the, I guess you'd call it the lattice work of the adjoining structure, you can see some really, really old grapes. Don't eat them. Really don't want to try that. In that same structure, there's a rather large barrel. It says this barrel, built prior to 1900, has the capacity of 1,000 gallons and is typical of the kind used in the winemaking industry of San Gabriel's past. There it is for you to see up close. And then, so this is, as I said, across the street from the mission. The building in the back there is part of the actual mission grounds. There's a small street in between. Let's see if I can navigate to see all photos. All right, fine. We'll just go through haphazardly then, as is my wont. Nope. Hold on. Nope. Okay, hold on here. Uh-oh, we're searching. I didn't want that. Oh no. Wait 1 second. Yeah. All right, here we go. We're back. All right. So in case you ever want to go out there, you can see the inside of the church or the cathedral. Oh boy. All right. Gosh. Yes. All right. There we go. And one of the things that led me to today, I love the pour box there. It's the pour box. Also inside the church there, they have a baptistry, and it alludes to agriculture of Southern California's past in the media naranja, which was the shape of the half orange on the top of this baptistry dome here. And you can also see there's sort of an allusion to fish, and okay, you got that. There you go. So this is actually the first place you actually enter where you get to park in the parking lot there. It's really the first thing you see, and it reminds me of 5th grade at Farragut Elementary, because we're all forced to learn about the mission past of California. And going there actually really, brought it home. It's been quite a few years since I made a diorama of whichever mission I was assigned. But going there and seeing the grounds and seeing the history is really something. They mentioned when the colonialists arrived, and my favorite part of that is, what's missing from this illustration? Did everyone rejoice at the colonialists' arrival? Well, that's a big question mark there. Okay, so now we're back to this. All right, let me see if I can finally get to the point. Next. Okay, there we are again. Next. That's a big vine, yes. Nope. All right, let me try and get back to that one image I want to see. All right, so we're touring around there. I'm really enjoying myself, and then my wife says, wait a minute, you've got to come here and see this. And there was a sign in a room that has a wine press and other wine-making material. And lo and behold, this same press was used on the Moinier Ranch at Palms near what is now Culver City. What? This land was part of the original Rancho Rincon de las Boyas, purchased from Esteban Higuera by the late Marius Meunier, father of the donor, Mrs. Helene Moinier. I'm really confused by the two different spellings. It could be a typo. It couldn't make me not. I tried to look up the Moinier Ranch, found very, very little. But it seemed like this is great. There's a solid connection between the pinpoint origin of Southern California agriculture, both winemaking, the site of oranges first having been planted in Southern California, that and also downtown LA, and so much more that you'll find in this wonderful book. So it took me about 2 minutes of searching to uncover or come across a mention of this book. I emailed Rachel and Judith were so lovely to come here and tell us more. They'll have the book for sale in the back of the room at the end of the night. They can sign it for you. I read it. It's fantastic. It's got a lot of great pictures, and they're going to tell us more. Thank you very much, Rachel and Judy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on a Wednesday evening. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our book and show you some of our favorite images from it and sort of take you on a whirlwind tour of the agricultural history of Los Angeles County. We're not Culver City specialists by any means. I'm sure there are many of you in this room who have some amazing tidbits about Culver City farming history that maybe you can share in the Q&A or with us at the table afterwards. We always love hearing some of those great local stories. So let me pull up my presentation here. Keep going. Oh, there it is. Technology.
It's great when it works.
You bet. Okay, so just real quickly, we're going to pass the mic back and forth because we each sort of have our favorite parts of the book that we like to talk about. But just real quick, how we met and how we started working on this book together. About 15 years ago, I was the director of something called University of California Cooperative Extension. We work with farmers and gardeners around the county, and I happened to run across these statistics in an old agricultural commissioner's report that said that Los Angeles County was once the largest farm county in the United States. What? It blew me away. I'm not from here. Judy's from here. I'm from the East Coast, and I was a transplant. So this almost seemed unbelievable to me because I moved here in the late 1980s, and it seemed the farthest thing from an agricultural place that I could imagine. It was nothing but freeways and mini malls as far as I could tell. So I couldn't believe that it had once been this farming empire, and I sort of thought in the back of my head, I'm going to write a book about that someday. And so over the years, I started, gathering some notes and stuff, and I started telling people that I was going to work on this book, and I told one of my coworkers, Yvonne, who ran the Master Gardener program in our office at that time, and she said, oh, you're going to write a book about LA's farm history? Well, you better talk to Judy Gerber because she's already writing that. And it turned out that Judy, who was a UC Master Gardener in our program, and still is, had already written a wonderful book called Farming in Torrance and the South Bay, and she was also gathering notes and materials for a book on the history of agriculture in Los Angeles County. So we said, well, maybe we could combine these two efforts, and we said, okay, let's each write an outline and then of the book we envision, and then trade and see how similar they are. And so we did that. We traded outlines, and it was freakish. They were like exactly the same book. So this was like kismet, and we said, well, clearly we have to write this book together. So the first time we met about the book was in July 2009, and we published it with Angel City Press. It came out in May 2016. So it was a rather lengthy process. We both have, a lot of other projects in our life. But we love to share it and we love to talk about it. So thank you for indulging us tonight. So, of course, this is Los Angeles County, as we know it today, a very urban place. That's the population of Los Angeles County at last count, over 10 million people. And just to give you a sense of how ginormous that is, the next largest county demographically, which is Cook County, Illinois, home to Chicago, is just over 5 million people. So we're like the demographic behemoth of the U.S. We're huge. So when people think about Los Angeles, they don't think about farming. They think about people and all kinds of other things. But farming exists in Los Angeles. This is an organic peach orchard that's up in the high desert near Lancaster. So farming is there. It's just often sort of out on the edges where you don't see it if you don't know where to look.
Yeah, and Rachel, I still say you're new here. I mean, I was born here. I grew up in the South Bay, and when I was a kid, in addition to having the Mission Project, we actually went on field trips to farms and dairies in my area and in this area, and I remember going to produce stands near Playa del Rey over off of Jefferson, so I miss the farmland. So what happened? What happened to make somebody like Rachel come here and think all we ever had were mini malls and freeways? How did we go from this? And this photo is actually one of my favorites. This is a woman sitting out overlooking what is now modern-day Hollywood. And how did we get here? How did we get to this place that we are now, to this, which is, even getting here from Torrance, it takes me a little bit longer than it used to when I first learned how to drive, which was a long time ago. So one of the things that we talked about was a lot of our images, we have some favorite images. All of our images come from some wonderful archives, local public libraries, universities. This image here is from the Los Angeles Public Library photo collection. This is a photo, 1981, the Golden State Freeway. This is supposed to be, or believed to be, cattle that got loose from a cattle truck that overturned on the freeway. And we like the picture because it sort of symbolized for us what we think of when it comes to Los Angeles. There's cows, there's concrete, and that sort of was the genesis for the idea of the title, because, this is concrete, and so it actually is adorning the back of the book. So as you can see, because it's LA, we think, well, maybe that's the Wrangler, or maybe it's the paparazzi chasing the cattle down. But most people, either if you've grown up here or if you haven't, most of the time when we think of agriculture now, this is how people see it. Passing by on a cattle truck, if you're driving up Highway 5 and you have to hold your nose near Harris Ranch, cattle aren't as friendly and welcome as they used to be. So this is sort of what sort of inspired us to do the book. But before this happened, there was a lot here, and Rachel's going to talk about one of her favorite eras, the native times.
So I guess maybe because I'm not from here, I was intrigued by what was here before it was even a place called Los Angeles. What was here? And of course, there were people here who were indigenous to the Los Angeles area. They were called the Tongva or the Kiz, or sometimes the Gabrieleño after the San Gabriel Mission. And we often today think of Los Angeles as a desert. It's not a desert, it's a Mediterranean climate, And during pre-colonial times, there was a lot more water, and the native people had access to a lot more streams and underground water sources, and they had ample food supplies. There were berries and nuts and roots that you could dig up, and of course there was the staple crop, the acorn from the abundant oak trees in the foothills. There was also fish and shellfish and wild game, so it wasn't a place of scarcity, it was often a place of abundance for the native people. And of course, there was the inevitable clash of cultures as sort of the advance team for colonization came through the Los Angeles area in 1769, the De Portola Party. Father Juan Crespi was documented this journey. They were coming from San Diego. They were trying to get to Monterey, where they wanted to establish a fort or presidio. And this place they're describing here with the rich soil and the grapevines and the abundant roses, this would have been right in what we know as Chinatown today, where the Los Angeles State Historic Park is, where the LA River is now, paved over since the 1930s. So this group of Spanish people moving through the area looked at this and they said, aha, this is a place where crops could grow. And it was no surprise that they came back just a couple of years later to establish the San Gabriel Mission. And this is a painting of the San Gabriel Mission that hangs in the Laguna Art Museum. It captures a moment in time where the mission personnel are interacting with the native people of the area who did not fare well during colonization. That's a subject for a whole nother talk about what happened to them during colonization. But for the purposes of this talk, it's important for you to know that the San Gabriel Mission is often called the mother of California agriculture, because here is where many European crops and other crops that Spaniards had brought from South America and the Caribbean and other places they had been to, this was where they tested them out. And so here at the San Gabriel Mission lie the roots of some major California agricultural enterprises that grew up over the year. The grape and wine industry, the citrus industry, olive production, fruits and vegetables. This was sort of the trial farm for all of that, and it was very productive, and the native people were the original farm workers of this area.
This is another one of my favorite paintings. This is a cattle drive. So we're kind of going, I didn't mention at the beginning that we're kind of going on a rush tour because there's no way, we decided, it took us so long to do the book that we were going to go from the native people till today. So there's no way we could sort of do an entire talk to make you all stay awake and to make it interesting. So we're sort of rushing through. But this is another, James Walker, this is a cattle drive. So as the mission era ended and the rancho era began, there was all these vast tracts of land that were being broken up. But before that, they were having people being able to graze, use the land to graze. And as Rachel mentioned, of course, the mission system went, from San Diego up north, and the goal was to go to Monterey. So everything north of Monterey, San Francisco had already sort of established itself. It was sort of already cosmopolitan. And anything south of Monterey County was sort of looked on as sort of backwards and sort of, derisively like cow counties. And, we talked about the large population of LA County today. Well, LA has always been bigger and badder and bolder. And at the time, LA County was known as the queen of the cow counties, which was not always complimentary, because if you're considered a backwards county and you don't really want to be the king or queen of that. But at the time, these cattle drives would go and up the coast all the way up to Monterey, and what they were doing was they were driving the cattle, they were raising the cattle, not at the time for beef, but for hides, for cow hides and for tallow and things like that. And the cow hides were so valuable that they were nicknamed California banknotes, because they were traded for their value as opposed to beef, which that would happen later. So, this is during the Rancho era, and of course, Rancho La Ballona, I never can say it right, and I know we have some people in the audience who are actually descendants of the family. And LA County is very interesting. One of the things we found interesting, and I've been working on this history for years, is how Los Angeles County is so broken up. And, some of that had to do with what happened during the Rancho era. All these pieces of land that were granted to people, and they had to prove that they owned the land. This rancho in this area ended up 14,000 acres. And, in my area, there's the Sepulveda, the Dominguez family, in that area, that they sort of duked it out, and they had to prove by modern sort of American and California state courts that they owned the land. That wasn't always possible. As Rachel mentioned, and even as you were mentioning when you did the pictures of the Mission, the first commercial wine growing region in the state of California was Southern California, LA County. There had been wine grapes that were going all the way up the state, but commercially, the first vintners grew and planted wine grapes in the area around Union Station and near Olvera Street. And I mean, as Rachel was reading the quote before, when they discovered the area, they're talking about this vine-clad valley with luxuriant fruit just hanging. And so, not satisfied with the Mission quality of the Mission grapes, other vintners from different countries, from Europe, from France and Italy, they started to come and establish the first commercial wine growing region. It's fascinating. The remaining remnant of that is the San Antonio Winery, which is still one of the wineries along the LA River. They have a fascinating tour that you can take. They're the last ones that are left. Aside from competition and a disease, there was also prohibition that took them out. At the same time, people developed commercial citrus groves. A lot of the early vintners also planted citrus orchards, and one of the early success stories was a Kentucky trapper named William Wolfskill, who was considered the father of the modern citrus industry. He planted, this is a lithograph showing his acreage also in the same area near downtown Los Angeles. He had quite a bit of early success with the citrus industry, but the problem was there wasn't a huge market for any products that were here because we were the backwards cow county, but that was going to change. Oops.
When things really took off for farmers in Los Angeles, when the gold rush came, because as Judy mentioned, there were very few people in Los Angeles County and Southern California in general. It was considered sort of like backwards and rural, and the gold rush really changed all that. Suddenly, thousands of people were migrating to Northern California, and they wanted beef, they wanted wine and brandy and fresh fruits and vegetables. One thing they really wanted was citrus. Does anybody know why they would have been willing to pay a premium for citrus in those days? Scurvy, right. They didn't understand the science of vitamin deficiency at that time, but they did know that if you didn't eat fresh fruits and vegetables, that your teeth and your hair would start to fall out, you could go blind, you would have all these horrible health problems, and so, people would pay a premium for things like oranges and lemons. So suddenly, farmers in LA, who had very little market for their lemons and their oranges and their grapes and their wine and their brandy, suddenly had a market, and everything they could grow, they could ship out of the port at San Pedro, which was a very rough port at that time. But suddenly, farmers started to expand because now they could sell what they grew. And so just as LA farmers were starting to make a buck and starting to get rich and really starting to do well, a number of things happened. And sort of the nail in the coffin was this terrible drought that happened during the 1860s. And remember, the landscape was it was mostly cattle ranching at that time. So you had these vast tracts of rancho land with cattle grazing, and cattle just dropped dead by the thousands, or were picked off by predators like grizzly bears, which were common at one time in Los Angeles. And this really sort of ended the rancho culture in Los Angeles and Southern California. And suddenly, people had to look for a new way of life, a new way to make a living. Of course, one of the ways they found was growing grain. Grain, like wheat, was a really adaptable crop because, first of all, you didn't need to irrigate it. You could plant it in the fall as soon as the rains came, and then within a few months, you had this beautiful golden harvest, and in those times, people shipped it to Liverpool, England. That's where the major grain markets of Europe were at that time. So this particular wheat harvest is on the Lancashire Ranch in the Van Nuys area, but there was plenty of grain farming right here in this area too. For example, a lot of barley fields in this area. But really, this was a temporary use of the land. As when the ranchos broke up and people had to sell off their rancho lands, oftentimes investors, often from Northern California, bought up all this land for pennies an acre, and they were sort of waiting to see how they could make a buck from this land, and wheat and grain was the temporary solution.
It was also a time when, as Rachel was saying, things were really, really sort of stressful and people were trying to make a living. So there was a lot of experimentation going on in the late 1880s and 1890s. This is another one of my favorite images, this beekeeper in his apiary area above Pasadena. There were a lot of people who advocated that California would be a great place to do something like have a bee ranch. John Muir said it was like a sweet bee ranch place because a lot of people could go, you didn't need a lot of irrigation, you could sort of squat on the land. There were a lot of people who came here that were sort of invalids who had disease. So they tried everything from raising bees with honey to doing things like exotic experiments. This is a man that's harvesting mulberry leaves because there was a premium that the state of California was going to offer for people to have silk. And they thought that would be a great way to make some money, raise your mulberries, get some silkworms, have it go. That was another thing that wasn't quite as successful as they had hoped it would be. That was another exotic experiment. This is another experiment. This is a pineapple ranch. This is J.B. Rapp's Pineapple Ranch in Hollywood, near what's now the intersection of Gower and Franklin. He's got the pineapples. I could never find, I don't know if Rachel, have you ever found any statistics or any information other than this is another great picture we got at the LA Public Library, how successful he was, but he certainly tried pineapples. So that didn't quite go as well as some of the other experiments. So in the meantime, aside from having these drought and these economic issues, one of the best things that happened to Los Angeles, and one of the worst if you're somebody who doesn't like how big we've become, is the first thing that happened when the railroad came. It changed everything. Not only did it provide a market for people to come here, but it provided a market for an easier way rather than going through the scary port of San Pedro or going around other areas, that the farmers could actually take their things on the train. And so the railroad was one of the first really successful ventures to help make Los Angeles promote itself, and it was quite a successful operation. It also led to the first of many land booms in the late 1800s. This is another one of my personal favorite. This colorful map is from the archives at UCLA. They have a wonderful map collection. And by the way, aside from working with Rachel for so long on the book together, I've been working on this idea for I would want to say the last 15 years. And now most of these images, a lot of them, you're talking about digitizing your collections, most of them now are digitized and you can see them online. But this was one of the first of many land booms. This is a map of a 9th Street tract down in downtown Los Angeles, and they show not only do you see there's farmland, but there's a little house in the middle, because that was one of the first things that they wanted to get farmers to come out here to California. They wanted them to be assured that not only would they have farmland, but they would have a place to live. And some of the campaigns would really take on a huge life of their own.
We really credit the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce with sort of boosting farming to the next level. As we've been saying, it was very experimental, sort of trying a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But the LA Chamber of Commerce, which formed in 1895, really took it to the next level. They started promoting Southern California, and in particular Los Angeles County agriculture, like crazy. They had a train, and they would take farm products all over the country. They had mountains of pamphlets and brochures brochures that they would pass out. They would make giant things like Liberty Bells out of oranges at the World Fairs. And they had this fabulous showroom in downtown LA where you have things like a giant elephant made out of Los Angeles grown walnuts named Jumbo. So people would come to this place and go, wow, the farming here is just so amazing. And they had a department it was a large department that worked with people who wanted to come farm in Los Angeles to help them find land and advise them on how to use it. And this was sort of the mastermind of the operation. Frank Wiggins, he was one of those invalids that Judy mentioned. He was a Indiana grocer who was diagnosed with tuberculosis and told that he only had a few months to live unless he could get to a warm, sunny, dry place. So he came to Los Angeles and he found a new life as sort of LA's main salesman, and he sold our agriculture and our real estate and everything for the LA Chamber of Commerce. In fact, William Mulholland once said of him, hopefully jokingly, the only way to slow down the growth of Los Angeles would be to kill Frank Wiggins. The other thing the LA Chamber did was to start marketing cooperatives that became the instruments of success of California agriculture, but they were born right here in LA. The LA Chamber organized what became Sun-Kissed Oranges. They got all the local orange growers together at the Chamber to say, hey, you guys work together to figure out how to a way to market your crop collaboratively so you can get the best price. And that little initial meeting grew into Sun-Kissed Oranges, and that same model was used to market avocados through Calavo, walnuts through Diamond Walnut. All these cooperative marketing institutions that so influenced California agriculture started right here in Los Angeles. There are many, many characters in our book, and this is one of our favorites. Her name is Eliza Tibbets. She was a lady who had a very colorful background. She came to Riverside with her third husband, Luther Tibbets, and they weren't farmers. They had no idea what they were doing, but like people did back in the day, they decided they would become farmers. And she wrote a letter to a friend of hers, William Saunders, who was the chief of the Agricultural Experiment Station at the newly formed U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. And she said, what should we grow here? And he sent her by rail 2 orange seedlings that were this sweet, easy to peel Brazilian variety. She and Luther went from Riverside to Union Station in their buckboard wagon to pick up these little orange trees. She watered them with her dishwater in her yard, and these went on to be the first 2 Washington navel oranges that sparked a whole industry that completely transformed farming in Southern California, because now farmers could not only sell their citrus, but they could sell this beautiful, uniform, sweet, easy to peel citrus. So citrus culture really intensified thanks to Eliza and Luther, who, by the way, died penniless while everybody else got rich growing clones from their orange trees. Another thing during this era that made agriculture grow so spectacularly was the source of various immigrant labor forces. By the 1860s, the indigenous people had either left the area, left farming, or in many cases had come, many of them died because of things that happened during colonization. So there wasn't enough labor. So one of the first groups of immigrant labor that came here starting in the 1860s were the Chinese. Many Chinese had come to help build the Transcontinental Railroad, and after the last spike was driven in Promontory, Utah, they came to California looking for agricultural work because many of them had experience as farmers in China. And so they were this highly skilled, knowledgeable labor force. And here you see them on a strawberry farm in Eagle Rock. And they were followed by other groups. the Japanese, the Mexican labor force, and we talk a lot about this in our book, about how all these different groups of people came here, how they helped us build farming in California and became part of the cultural landscape.
So we're jumping ahead a little bit. This is a 1927 photo, also from the LA Public Library. This is labeled as the Venice District Celery Fields. So Venice and Culver both had lots and lots of celery. And being from Torrance, there's another area that likes to compete, or they used to like to compete, to call themselves the celery capital of the world. Venice actually had its own incorporated celery district. And I remember actually seeing celery fields up until I was a kid in the 1970s. Lomita also likes to consider itself the celery capital of the world. So somebody is either exaggerating or perhaps depending on which part of the county. But this is, just acres and acres of celery field. And this was also another area that a lot of the Japanese and Japanese Americans worked in the celery fields in this area. I mean, as somebody who's become a master gardener, it makes sense that celery would do really well in sandy soil because it's nice and straight. I know that I'm just throwing that in there as a personal. But that was one of the first commercial, really large-scale specialty crops that did well, in addition to some other things that started happening around the same time. These are some workers in the San Fernando Valley walnut packing house. Walnuts and fruit trees and fruit crops also became more prevalent during this era as things became a little bit more successful. They started becoming a bit more professional and things were organized. In addition to the marketing cooperatives that Rachel mentioned, things like packing houses and processing was also something that started to become more popular in our region. There needed to be a way for people to get their products, processed into market, and so that started expanding in the first part of the 20th century as well. The other thing that started happening was, as more people came to LA, we've always marketed ourselves as being the place to be. So what started happening was there were tourist attractions that started to develop. In one of our chapters, we talk about fantastic farms and things like that, things related. One of the things that started happening were nurseries and gardens. This is a picture of the rose garden at Paul DeLongpre's Rose Garden in Hollywood. DeLongpre Park is still named after him. He was an artist who came here and he developed beautiful gardens. So people started to do all these other things to attract visitors. Aside from having traditional agriculture, they wanted to have other things to do that were sort of related to farming in a really off-the-wall way. There were lion farms, there were alligator farms, there were ostrich farms. This is a photo from the Los Angeles Ostrich Farm, which was right across from the Los Angeles Alligator Farm. So some of these, and what I learned working on this project is I really didn't know much about ostriches, but apparently they have a nasty habit of kicking people and they can be really violent. And so apparently if you cover the ostrich's eyes, it's not as threatening to, I guess, a whole group of school children. And he's apparently giving them an interesting lesson. So people could go to the ostrich farm, the alligator farm, but there were also things like monkey farms. There was monkey farm apparently here in Culver City, and this is a picture of a monkey who's actually riding on the back of an ostrich. So not only do you have the monkey farm, but you have the ostrich farm. And some of the gardens like DeLongpre's and the garden at Huntington, those gardens developed and they had all these elaborate plants, which was an ironic thing because all of these different plants that people brought in created what is now the largest agricultural commodity in Los Angeles County, nursery products. That started with, decorating your ostrich farm, and it increased the nursery industry. This is a photo of the Theodore Payne. He has been known in recent years as somebody who was really influential in native plants. There's a nursery out in Sun Valley, but this was in downtown Los Angeles. This was his actual nursery store that he had. He didn't only trade in native plants at the time, he did other things, and so the nursery industry became one of the largest commodities that Los Angeles County has become known for. It still exists today at the top commodity, and some of our statistics are amazing from back in the day.
So this is these are some statistics from 1909 that just seem stunning to me today. 8,000 farms in Los Angeles County, and this was the first year that LA County was considered the top agricultural county, not just in California, but in the nation. And we were the top producer of all these different crops, including walnuts, lemons, strawberries, etc. And there were hundreds and hundreds of dairies and poultry ranches. And we really love this, this brochure from the LA Chamber of Commerce. I think this is 1929, and our book designer used it in the cover art for our book. But as I think Judy said at the beginning, LA is never shy about bragging. So we weren't just the farming capital, we were the center of an agricultural empire. You know, it's very dramatic. So things that sort of intensified this trend in the teens and 20s were development of new water resources, such as the Los Angeles Aqueduct, which opened in 1914, I believe. And I think we're all familiar with the photo of the opening day of the aqueduct in the San Fernando Valley, where the water's rushing down, and it's the day where William Mulholland famously said about the water, "There it is, take it." So that's not the picture we chose to share in the book. This is a picture of when Owens Valley farmers had bombed the aqueduct, and it got, you know, that's what happened there, because of course the water that we got from the aqueduct that made the San Fernando Valley and the rest of the city of Los Angeles green and allowed subdivisions to grow and multiply and farming to grow came at the expense of the Owens Valley farmers, who lost a lot of their cropland because they lost their water. And as subdivisions multiplied and intensified, this little lander movement grew. This was very popular in the teens and 20s and up to the 1950s in Los Angeles. These communities called small farm home communities and little lander communities. And basically what it was real estate was developed into subdivisions where you got a house with 2 or 3 or 5 acres of land around it. And so the LA Times and the Chamber of Commerce and other entities in Los Angeles said, hey, you can make a living on your little plot of land. And there were even magazines like this magazine called 1 Acre in Independence. It was quite a trend at that time to have a little piece of land that you could live off of. This sort of transformed a bit in the 1930s as the Depression began, and of course there were a lot of farm labor struggles throughout California, but particularly in Los Angeles during the 1930s. So this was like decades before Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers made farm worker issues famous in California. In the 1930s, there were constant farm labor strikes. There was a huge strike called the El Monte Berry Strike, which spread out throughout the county, all the way over to this side of the county, where workers went on strike from picking everything from raspberries, like these raspberry workers that are in Rosemead here, all the way over to the Celery Fields of Venice and this part of the county. And this happened throughout the decade as farmers, you know, struggled to stay in business and oftentimes out of necessity cut the wages of their farm laborers. And some of those small farm homes then became much more about survival. This is a photo taken by Dorothea Lange, who took the famous migrant mother photo from the Depression era. She also came to Los Angeles and took many wonderful photos of farmers, farm workers, and this small farm home community in El Los Angeles agriculture was so strong that even with all the damage caused by the Depression, by 1940, it was bouncing back, and the LA Chamber shared this rather stunning statistic, which was that nearly half of the Los Angeles food supply originates on farms within 50 miles of the city. And we don't collect statistics like that anymore, but if we did, I could assure you that the number would be probably like a portion of a single percent. It would be a teeny tiny amount of food. And that was often due to Japanese farmers, because by 1940, there were many small farmers who were Japanese and Japanese Americans who were truck farmers. They knit together the pieces of undeveloped property where housing developments hadn't yet sprung up, and they grew fruits and vegetables, and they made a productive farming environment in this rapidly urbanizing county. But of course, that changed very abruptly with the U.S. entry into World War II and Pearl Harbor. And this was a quote from a man. He wasn't young anymore, but he was young at the time that this happened. Many farmers lost their equipment and their land. California laws actually prevented Japanese and Japanese Americans from purchasing land, so they leased it. So the land was the first thing they lost, but they also lost equipment and labor and other things that went into their production when they went into camps like Manzanar. And this is actually a photo from our book that was taken in Culver City. This was a state agricultural official who was saying that farmers need all this equipment that Japanese farmers had that's no longer being used. We need to get this equipment and share it with the farmers who are now trying to farm this land. And so here he is being photographed with farm equipment that belonged to Japanese farmers who were at Manzanar, and apparently there was a group that went there and negotiated purchasing some of that equipment. We don't know what happened with that, and that's what's sometimes hard about writing books like this, is you see these tantalizing stories and you want to know more, but you never get to know what happened and what the end of this story was. So I think we hope that they got a fair deal on their farm equipment, but I don't know if that was the case or not. Ironically, when the U.S. incarcerated Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II, it left a huge gap in farm labor. There now wasn't enough farm labor to go around, and school children and secretaries were, sent out to the fields to do some of the harvesting, but it wasn't enough. So the U.S. started the Bracero Program, which went from about 1942 well into the 1960s, which brought agricultural workers from rural Mexico to the U.S. This is the first group of braceros coming to Los Angeles in, I think, 1942.
Yeah, and aside from organized labor and having people work on farms, this was the birth of the Victory Garden movement. There were a lot of people that, they were encouraging people to have their own source of food, because any food that was grown in the farms needed to be sent to the soldiers that were serving in World War II. This is a pamphlet from Manual Arts High School. They're showing their Food for Freedom campaign. The Los Angeles Times was so in support of this idea, they actually set up a demonstration Victory Garden on Wilshire Boulevard. They had Victory Garden classes even near USC. It was a huge promotional effort to get people to grow some of their own food to support the war effort, because things were in shortage. This is another photo we also got from the LA Public Library. The kids didn't learn just how to raise vegetables and fruits, but they did animal husbandry. Here they are with some of their rabbits. And during the war, this is a photo showing Covina. This is from 1941, I believe, right before the outset of the war. These are just dozens and dozens of citrus, acres and acres of citrus groves in Covina. I mean, it just shows you how much agricultural land, how much, farming was still going on. And then as the war went on and things started to change, a lot of the things that drew people here back, that drew the Spanish here, they discovered once you got out of the service, people came here, they didn't want to leave. The climate, I mean, we have one of the best climates in the world. I mean, we have a Mediterranean climate. You can grow year-round. So the things that made the people who wanted to come here, they didn't want to leave. And during the war, people stayed. And at first, development started happening slowly. You know, here you can see a development. This is in the San Fernando Valley, if I recall. And there you can see some, you know, citrus orchards. It started happening gradually. Pretty soon, it started happening. This is 1949, I believe. This is, you know, subdivisions that they were developing using the iconic imagery, ironically, of citrus groves. They would, you know, name subdivisions and farmland after, you know, Orange Acres, or they would use these clever titles. People wanted to have suburbs. They wanted schools. They wanted shopping centers. They wanted things like that. They didn't really want cattle and cows because, you know, cows don't really smell all that great, and they wanted to have, you know, new industries were developing, from aerospace to engineering. You know, there were a lot of companies that settled in this area, and particularly, you know, the aerospace industry. You know, my dad, when he was young, he worked in the industry in our area here. So things started happening, you know, more rapidly as the middle of the 1960s happened. I just know, because I'm very involved in the city of Torrance and having worked on the book, they had half a dozen dairies as late as 1964 until the city decided to outlaw farm animals because, like I said, nobody wanted to live with smelly cows. So at the time, in the late 60s and the early 70s, when all of the farmland was disappearing, you know, sort of that old Joni Mitchell song, Big Yellow Taxi, you know, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. There was a sort of a back to land, back to the earth movement at the same time that was developing. And some of the things that started happening were people wanted to start growing their own food. One of the first indicators of this was in the mid-1970s. This is one of my favorite photos. We always like to ask our audiences, depending on the demographics of the audience, if you can identify these two gentlemen. The one in the back is Mayor Tom Bradley with his patent leather shoes and his double knit suit and his rake there, and he's groundbreaking a community garden in Reseda. He had a neighborhood community garden program. He actually had an office down at City Hall and in downtown LA, but I guess he thought that this gentleman next to him, how many of you recognize him? Eddie Albert? Right? Green Acres, right? So some people have no clue from Green Acres, but Eddie Albert was famous for, you know, taking his wife from the city and starting a farm. But this was literally them breaking ground on a community garden plot. Community gardens started to grow in Los Angeles County, both literally and figuratively. At the same time as development happened, this is another photo that I could not believe this photo when I found it. This is Bunker Hill. This is a community garden, Bunker Hill Community Garden, also from about 1975. You can see in the top left-hand corner, the Bonaventure Hotel. Yeah. That white building there is still an LA County building. It's still there. And they had a nice crop of corn growing at the community garden. That was one of Mayor Bradley's community gardens. That is no more. At the same time as we had community gardens growing, we had farmers markets growing. Jerry Brown, during his first iteration as governor, he passed the Farmer Direct Marketing Act in about 1976, which allowed farmers to have products sold directly to consumers. It was not as expensive for consumers. The farmers didn't make as much as they did on the wholesale market, but it was a chance for them to have their products that weren't so perfect looking. Consumers wanted them. This is a photo from the opening day at the Santa Monica Farmers Market in 1981. We still have over almost 200 farmers markets in LA County. You go to almost every day of the week, there's a local farmers market. People wanted to have local senses, local sources of food. Oh, I forgot about Ida.
So, as LA has become less of an agricultural county, its consumers have gained power. So we've influenced farming through things like farmers markets and also things like the medfly crisis. Who remembers when helicopters were flying over spraying malathion? So I don't know if you know this. Okay, the medfly is an invasive pest that infects up up to 300 different fruits and vegetable crops, and it creates all kinds of problems for California agriculture. So Culver City has the not the honor, but the distinction of being where the very first medfly was found in California in 1975. So what started here spread to other communities around California. So that was in 1975, and at first ground spraying, going from house to house, worked, and then the medfly came back, and so then it progressed to the aerial spraying with helicopters, and cities started suing the state of California, and Jerry Brown during that era was referred to as the Lord of the Flies. I don't know if anybody remembers that one, but there were protests all over Los Angeles, and this is one of the protests by this lady, Ida Honoroff, who was sort of leading the charge against malathion spraying for the medfly during the 1980s. And of course, we also lost agriculture during the 1960s and on to freeway development. This is the last season that a field was being farmed before the 105 freeway went in. So all these things, as agriculture was disappearing, like Judy said, things like farmers markets and community gardens became ever more valuable to people. And we don't want people to think that LA agriculture is gone, because there's still farming. In fact, we're one of the top carrot producers in the country, believe it or not, in LA County. It's just that all the carrot fields are up in the high desert around Lancaster and Palmdale in the high desert. So if you're driving around out there sometime, you might come across a big field of carrots, and if you eat baby carrots from the store, they might be from Los Angeles County, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad tidings, but they're not really baby carrots. They're regular-sized carrots that have been ground down to a cute little baby size. So, yeah, everybody always gets bummed out by that, sorry. So we also grow peaches and onions and potatoes and alfalfa and all kinds of other things in Los Angeles commercially, along with nursery products, like Judy said. But sort of what's more visible today is the urban agriculture that exists in certain parts of Los Angeles, where people are selling things from their backyards or community gardens or little tiny micro farms in the city. On the left there is the Growing Experience Urban Farm in Long Beach, which is at the Carmelitos Housing Development. And on the right, that's an urban farm by USC called the Expo Urban Mini Farm, where they sell fruits and vegetables, plus all these jams and jellies and pickles and honey and stuff that they produce there. And if you know where to look, you can still find little hints of LA's agricultural history. This is Compton. There's a neighborhood called Richland Farms in Compton. In fact, I was just there a couple weeks ago. If you drive through certain parts of Compton, you'll see people going down the street on horseback, because it's one of the last remaining small farm home communities where it hasn't been built out, where those houses with the big lots of land around them that were intended for small-scale farming still exist. So people have cows and horses and big gardens. If you know where to look, LA's agricultural history is still there.
And this is also in Compton. This is the Eagle Tree. This is one of the boundary markers, the unofficial but became official boundary markers of the Dominguez Rancho. It's at the dead end of an apartment building. They just have a little marker on it. You know, it's sort of, we also thought that this was sort of symbolic of, you know, what's become of Los Angeles County, that, you know, we used to be this abundant area of trees and farms, and this is all that's left. And, you know, I guess you can take a peek at the tree. It's amazing that it still survives. It's sort of was me an optimistic look at how, you know, if you want things to survive, you have to sort of fight for them. But it's still there. And then that's just sort of a picture of the cover of the book, which we've been sort of showing. So, I guess questions and answers. I don't know what.
So, say that again?
Malibu has several venues.
Yes, that's true.
Produce the wine in LA County because of regulatory issues. We haven't produced the wine in Ventura County.
Right, the comment that was made is there are some wineries in Malibu, yes, that are still producing grapes, but then they make the wine in Ventura County because of LA County regulations. Yes.
I know that the National Railroad came to Los Angeles in 1876. But before that, did they have local railroads which would connect downtown Los Angeles to the port?
Yes, I don't know as much about that, but I believe there was a railroad that went from downtown LA down to the port before we got the railroad that sort of connected us with the rest of the country. But we are not railroad historians. We sort of only, all of my history knowledge is sort of around this farming theme.
Because it
Yes.
was difficult to get a large quantity of produce
Right.
on a wagon
Yes.
down to a boat in San Diego without a train.
Without a train. I think the ox carts were used for many years. That was how the ranchers got their hides down to the port. They would put them in ox carts, haul them down there, and then throw them over the bluff and ferry them out to the ships.
Phineas Fanning is the gentleman that started the railroad from San Pedro to Los Angeles.
Do you know when that was?
It was in the 1800s, and you can go down to Phineas Fanning's mansion in Wilmington.
Oh, cool.
And it's run by the LA City Parks and Recreation. And it's really a great house to see.
Neat.
A wonderful history about the beginnings of the railroad and Huntington and all the people that got together $600,000 to make sure that they would stop in LA. So it's quite interesting at the Abandoned Museum.
Wonderful.
In the 1930s, when I lived in Albany, New York, we used to buy the oranges, which I peddled from house to house. And I used Blue Goose and Sunkist.
Wow.
Oranges that
That wasn't
I peddled
Neat.
as a youngster.
Wow, and at that time, probably oranges were just starting to get popular because at one time they were so unique and special, kids would get them in their Christmas stockings.
I was told this area that, way back when, that it was a lot of bean fields. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, when you hear them say bean fields, yes, there were a lot of bean fields,
Specific to what kind of bean?
but they were lima beans. Yeah, lima beans.
Even up in the peninsula, in Palos Verdes Peninsula, there were lima beans, and they also had a lot of garbanzo beans, but I don't know if they had them down here. Lima?
Yeah.
Lifford Park was the lima bean factory.
Back in the early 50s, there used to be a farm right on Motor Avenue where the train tracks go across. I used to live on the street just north of the bridge there. And so we'd go down to the train track, and on the other side of the track was a farm. They grew corn over there. And evidently the farmer knew the engineer of the train, and the train would slow down, and the farmer would come out and bring him corn, and it would allow us kids to hitch a ride on.
That's great.
That's a cool story.
What a great story.
1950.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.